It's really an honor for me to speak to you in this evening on a very pertinent issue, very stronger issue that is facing the mankind now, that is climate change. And I'm very happy that this program is organized for the students, the clergies, and the teachers of CSI group, and that is all relevant because the churches and religious institutions has a clear role to play, especially when you are facing a disaster in the planet. It's actually a planetary crisis, and also it's actually a red warning to the entire humanity in the world. And that is the reason why throughout the world, people speak about climate change. Throughout the world, people demand climate justice. And also throughout the world, people actually apply, and even the school children, they strike that for the cause of climate, primarily because they want the earth in the pristine condition, because they want all the resources in the pristine condition for the future. And that is the reason why this topic is very, very important. And we are talking in the context of the global report that came out on climate scenario in August 2021. And what I will do in this lecture is just highlight what are the salient features of this report. And in this context, what are the things which is where the changes will be there in the Indian continent. And also we will discuss how we can overcome this crisis by judicious action, judicious planning, and of course, happy living. And that is also very, very important. And that is the reason why I am very interested to talk to you, because, the primary reason why this earth is more hotter than the previous time is primarily because of our own greed. And unless and until we are in a position to control that, we are not going to sustain the resources in this planet. And that is a simple philosophy with which actually we can proceed and with which we can actually survive. So sustainability is the key developmental thinking particularly after the COVID. The COVID has taught us a lot of lessons, and even a small virus in the world can actually make the entire world stand still. And then we need to think about what is actually the meaning of life, and then what is actually the way in which we have to progress, and what exactly is the meaning of life, especially when you live in all these kind of calamities. And all these answers actually we have to seek. And this is one occasion, the post-COVID the period is one occasion where we have to think about the way in which we developed so far, the way in which we reacted to the Mother Earth, and also the way in which we plan for the future. That is very, very important. So in this context, let me come back to my presentation. Let me share the, hope you can all see the slide.
Yes, we can see.
Okay. So the topic which I am going to discuss today is the climate change, the environmental warnings to India. And before I come to the specific topic of climate change, these are the famous the quotations of world leaders, religious leaders, etc. on this topic of climate change. Okay, and for example, if you look at the president of France, and he said that we have a single mission to protect and hand on the planet to the next generation. So again, the sustainability thinking is there in the predictions and the preaching of many of the world leaders. And if you look at the Pope Francis on climate change, the violence that exists in the human heart is also manifest in the symptoms of illness that we see in earth, the water, the air, and the living things. And the Al Gore, the earlier former vice president of USA, also said people need to stop financing denial of climate change, because we cannot actually deny the fact that climate change is a reality. Year after year, the scientific studies and the social realities make us believe that climate change is happening. It is real. It is not actually a speculation. And that is the reason why we need to think and focus our attention on climate change, because that is the most important climatic issue facing the mankind in the 21st century. Okay, so it is connected with all. That is what we are going to discuss. And before we go, let us see what exactly is this phenomenon of climate change. If you look at
human activities,
this video,
from pollution to overpopulation, are driving up the Earth's temperature and fundamentally changing the world around us. The main cause is a phenomenon known as the greenhouse effect. Gases in the atmosphere, such as water vapor, carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and chlorofluorocarbons, let the sun's light in, but keep some of the heat from escaping, like the glass walls of a greenhouse. The more greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, the more heat gets trapped, strengthening the greenhouse effect and increasing the Earth's temperature. Human activities, like the burning of fossil fuels, have increased the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere by more than a third since the Industrial Revolution. The rapid increase in greenhouse gases in the atmosphere has warmed the planet at an alarming rate. While Earth's climate has fluctuated in the past, atmospheric carbon dioxide hasn't reached today's levels in hundreds of thousands of years. Climate change has consequences for our oceans, our weather, our food sources, and our health. Ice sheets, such as Greenland and Antarctica, are melting. The extra water that was once held in glaciers causes sea levels to rise and spills out of the oceans, flooding coastal regions. Warmer temperatures also make weather more extreme. This means not only more intense major storms, floods, and heavy snowfall, but also longer and more frequent droughts. These changes in weather pose challenges. Growing crops becomes more difficult. The areas where plants and animals can live shift, and water supplies are diminished. In addition to creating new agricultural challenges, climate change can directly affect people's physical health. In urban areas, the warmer atmosphere creates an environment that traps and increases the amount of smog. This is because smog contains ozone particles, which increase rapidly at higher temperatures. Exposure to higher levels of smog can cause health problems such as asthma, heart disease, and lung cancer. While the rapid rate of climate change is caused by humans, humans are also the ones who can combat it. If we work to replace fossil fuels with renewable energy sources like solar and wind, which don't produce greenhouse gas emissions, we might still be able to prevent some of the worst effects of climate change.
Okay, what you have seen is a film by the National Geographic explaining the reasons for climate change. It's very simple. The video is very simple in explaining that the gases which we contribute to the atmosphere, especially the carbon dioxide, methane, sulfur dioxide, and the chlorofluorocarbons, and that accumulate in the atmosphere, and they prevent the heat radiation from going into the outer space, and just like a greenhouse. And as a result, the Earth is warming up. And unless and until we stop that, or we reduce the emission, and the Earth is will continue to grow. And that is the report also says, the climate change report 2021, the physical science basis explained the same thing. And I'll tell you a brief about the IPCC report. IPCC is nothing but Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And what you see, what is released is the sixth part of the sixth assessment report. And the report says a very simple, and the report is actually, what is IPCC? IPCC is not a government institution. It's actually a setup, an intergovernmental panel set up by the United Nations, mainly to provide the policymakers or the political leaders with regular scientific assessments about the status of climate. Okay, and they have no research, direct research. They compile the reports from different parts of the world, inviting scientists. They prepare report for them, and ultimately this is vetted by different bodies. And then finally, this will be released. And then finally, the policy matter will be communicated to different governments across the world. So the government, it is up to the governments to actually take up the issue and do the necessary things so that our Earth will be saved from the issue of global warming. And that is why, you know, because of their action to control the climate change, and they got the Nobel Prize, 2007 Nobel Prize for Peace, because this is one of the most serious challenges facing the mankind. And today, interestingly, the Nobel Prize for the environment is also now the Nobel Prize is now announced, and the Nobel Prize primarily for this year has won by a few people who work on the climate change. And very interestingly, because climate change is a very serious issue, and whoever actually work for controlling the climate change and suggesting policies, technologies, etc., have a major role to play, particularly when you look at the future of the world. Okay, so these kind of assessments are actually done by 3 working groups: Working Group 1, Working Group 2, and Working Group 3, and they have separate agendas. And now the report is released by the Working Group 1, who work on the physical science basis of climate change. And now there will be reports by the second group, which work on the climate change impact, adaptation, and vulnerability. And third group will work on the mitigation of climate change. They will suggest the methods. So these 3 working groups are working currently under the IPCC. And then they will, this is the process, it's a series of processes. I am not explaining that, but ultimately this will involve a lot of experts from different parts of the world. And then they ultimately all these reports will be compiled and published and given to the governments for appropriate policy making. So I'm not explaining the whole thing. And the whole process started in 1990 when they first published this report. And thereafter, in every 7 years, we will see the release of this kind of a report. And the 21 report on one working group is now available. And the final report will be published next year in 2022, and after a gap of 7 years. And based on this report, the governments will take appropriate action to actually reduce the emissions so that the climate change impact can be reduced. They also published special reports. Okay. And now we are waiting for the upcoming reports, especially the synthesis report, which will actually synthesize the entire information available globally on climate change. And this will form the basis of action by the governments in the remaining years to come. So that is the relevance of this kind of a report. And the report, which is released in August 2021, was prepared by 234 scientists from 66 countries, including India. So it's actually a larger exercise involving a large number of people, scientists, and a large number of the countries involved in that. And then they have prepared this kind of a report. Let us see what are the major features of this report. And I will start with the explanation by the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who said that it is actually a code red for humanity. Alarm bells are deafening, and the evidence is irrefutable. That means there is a clear evidence that the climate change is affecting the world. Sitting in South India, we also feel that there are erratic rain. During the monsoon season, we are not getting frequent rains. In between, there are depressions. You look at Tamil Nadu coast, then the frequency of cyclones are increasing. And in Kerala coast, the Arabian Sea was the coolest in the world. Now it is becoming the hottest, and the number of cyclones are increasing, and the number of rainy days are increasing, and the extreme climatic scenarios and the rampant floods are increasing in Kerala. And you look at many of the states in India, the similar things are happening. That means we are actually a country where the economy is strongly based on agriculture. And if something happens with the temperature, and if something happens with the weather patterns, and normally the entire cyclical activity, which we actually tuned in for the last several hundred years as part of our agricultural civilization, that will be lost. We look at the fishermen in the coastal areas of India, and then the entire activity, the fishing activity, and everything is predictable for them. It was predictable for them, but now it is unpredictable, highly unpredictable. That we will discuss later, but this is a scenario. And this report says that the Paris Climate Agreement ultimately agreed upon limiting the global temperature up to 1.5 degrees centigrade compared to the pre-industrial level. That means if you go beyond 1.5 degree, and then the ecosystem will start responding, and there will be some irreversible changes in the planet. So it is our duty. It is the duty of the political leaders across the world. It is the duty of the people across the world to see that the temperature is not going beyond 1.5 or to the maximum 2 degrees centigrade in order to avoid the catastrophes. So that means we need to take a path of sustainability. We need to have a more climate resilient approach and a path in order to develop. So this is very, very important. Okay, so it is unequivocal that human influences has warmed this atmosphere, ocean and land. That means this influence is there in every part of the planet, be it air, be it the land, be it the ocean. So that means it's warming up the ocean, just like the Reverend Bishop said. The changes are evident, especially in the Greenland, where the ices are melting. Antarctic, for the first time in the history of Antarctic region, they have seen the rain. If it is raining, means there is more warmer water, and that may facilitate further melting of the ice. So changes are happening. Canada this year has the largest temperature ever recorded in the history, and many parts of the world recorded the highest temperature so far in the recorded history of mankind. So that means changes are happening everywhere, and you have seen the changes which has happened. The cyclones in America, which actually caused the death, ultimately resulted in a large number of human death, etc., etc. Okay, so that means the land as well as the ocean have taken up almost whatever possible with this ecosystem naturally, because the ocean take up carbon dioxide, absorb carbon dioxide, absorb heat, but there is a limit for that, because the global climate is actually controlled by the ocean, which covers almost 70% of the earth. And if it go beyond a particular level, and then what happens, the ocean will expand in volume, and that is another reason why the sea surface is now increasing. The sea level is now increasing. It is not just because of the melting of ice in the polar region, but the ocean is increasing in its volume, thermal because of the thermal the increase in the thermal capacity. This is increasing, the volume is increasing, and all these things ultimately contribute to the sea level rise. Okay, and this is an issue. So that means the impacts are seen in many parts of the world in many ways. Okay, and if you look at the you compare 1850 to 1900, and then till now, what is happening now is there is almost a temperature increase of 0.8 degrees centigrade to 1.3 degrees centigrade. And if you take an average, it may be around 1.07 degrees centigrade. But even that 1 degree increase in the temperature, or the mean temperature itself, is problematic to the world. So our intention is by 2020, by the end of this century, we have to cut down this kind of an increase. Otherwise, there is going to be a lot of ecosystem catastrophes. Okay. And then if you look at the way in which the greenhouse gases are responsible for the global warming, and all the greenhouse gases are produced primarily by the fossil fuel burning. It may be by the automobiles, it may be by the industry, etc., etc. So that means whenever there are more economic activity, developmental activities, we will be contributing more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. That means that is happening. But at the same time, we also have another pollutant called aerosol. Okay, and aerosol is now cooling the atmosphere in tropical countries, but that will not last for long. And that is the reason why in tropical areas, we are not actually seeing that much of a change. Because of aerosol, which is another pollutant, they mask the impact of the greenhouse gases. But that once that comes down, the impacts will be much more. So this is again another issue which will be facing us. Okay, and then how will the scientists assess the future of the climate change? Through climate modeling only, with the help of modern computer software, they will do that. Okay, and then by analyzing the data and what will be the future emission scenario under different conditions, they actually predict the future of the global temperature and future of the climatic changes. Okay, so because there are large number of gases responsible for that, maximum amount of gas which contribute now in terms of volume is carbon dioxide. Okay, and at the same time, methane is much more problematic, but at the same time, the quantity is less. The maximum amount of carbon dioxide is the villain. The primary villain is carbon dioxide, and then we have the nitrous oxide, and then we have the sulfur dioxide, and some amount of chlorofluorocarbon which is emitted by the refrigerants, and all these things ultimately contribute. By in terms of volume, carbon dioxide is a major villain, and this is emitted by burning the fossil fuel, automobile industry, etc., etc. So these are the gases which contribute, and even if you try to control carbon dioxide emission now, the impact will be there for several decades. Okay, and that is the reason why, if you look at this graph, you can see that if you are not actually controlling this kind of the carbon dioxide emission, and then there will be increased amount of the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. So these are the graphs which show the the emission scenario under different scenarios. Okay, and but all the scenarios tells a very simple story. And even if the human beings or the nations across the world try to control carbon dioxide emission even now, the impact will be there for several decades. That means this is actually the time wherein we have to take some kind of an action. Okay, and then what are the changes happening? The mean surface temperature of the land, ocean, and water is increasing. Okay, and all these models ultimately project that there may be a 2-degree increase by the end of this century, or in some of the extreme cases, it can go up to 4 degrees centigrade in the mean temperature, and that is one prediction. And second prediction is that there are extremes. See, heat is a normal scenario, and there may be variations in heat, and that's a common thing. But there are extreme heat events or hot temperature extremes, and there are also cold temperature extremes, and these are extremes. Normally the extremes happen once in a while, but now the frequency of hot extreme, cold extremes, they are increasing in different parts of the world. It depends upon the place where you are in the earth. Okay, and precipitation level. If you look at the precipitation level is also increasing in certain parts of the world. It is decreasing in certain part of the world. For example, if you look at India and if you look at Kerala, you look at the projection, and all the projection scenario says that if the temperature is 4 degrees centigrade more, and there will be very much increase in the percentage of rainfall in India. Even with the 2 degrees centigrade, there is going to be an increase in the rainfall pattern in many parts of India. It is not always true for every part, but if you look at this diagram, you will see that the major part of the India see an increase in the precipitation, mean precipitation level. There will be more rain, to be precise, and that will change. If that will change not only the scenario in agriculture, but that will change the chemical quality of water also. For example, if more fresh water reaches the sea, and then that will change the salinity of the sea, and then that will also bring in a lot of nutrients to the sea, and the chemical composition of ocean will also change. So that means these are all interconnected, that you should understand. Okay. And if you look at the 10-year event regarding the heavy precipitation over land, and in many of the areas there is going to be more and more rain in many part of the world, and that will also impact the soil moisture, because if you are doing agriculture, soil moisture play a very, very important role, and soil moisture changes will also happen, and there will be more moisture in the soil as a result of more precipitation, and that will actually increase the incidence of pest attack, and then that will have its own implications on agriculture, and that will indirectly affect the health of the ecosystem as well. So these are all interconnected, and that's what I said. Okay, and then global sea surface temperature is also going to increase. For example, if you look at the Arctic ice area, the ice cover is decreasing year after year. That means all the melted ice ultimately reach the ocean, increases the sea level, and this has already started, and it has become a reality now. And ocean pH is something which indicates ocean acidity. That means if there is more carbon dioxide, very simply, even though you are not a chemist, there is more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere means more saturation in the atmosphere. That means this carbon dioxide will ultimately dissolve in the seawater, and carbon dioxide is CO2, and then this is H, the water is H2O, and that will form a mild carbonic acid. So throughout the world, the ocean is becoming more and more acidic. And when the ocean become more acidic, what are the things happen? It will affect all the animals with a calcium carbonate shell or calcareous shell, like the corals and the mollusks, or the clams, oysters, etc., which we eat, and the health of the entire ecosystem will be impacted. Okay, and all these things are the impact of ocean acidification, and we don't have much research data available in India as far as ocean pH is concerned, and now the scientists started working on that. Okay, so that is the scenario. And also the sea level, if you compare the sea level, I will show you some of the specific slides related with India, and sea level is also increasing. And this is those who are interested, you can also look at this website of NASA, which specifically tells you the sea level changes in each and every major cities in the world. Okay, and you can search find out the city, and this is the one which I have prepared for you. What will be the sea surface changes, sea level changes by the end of this century? That means 2100. And you can look at Chennai, look at Cochin, look at Mumbai, look at the other major cities in India. And if you compare Chennai in the east coast and Cochin in the west coast of India, you can see that the prediction is around 0.71 meter as far as Cochin is concerned. It is only 0.57 in the case of Chennai. And that means the increase in the sea level is almost 11 millimeter per year. So this is a very serious warning, because Cochin, as you know, is a city which is coastal, and it is actually close to Cochin is the Vembanad Lake, and then we have the Kuttanad region, which is below the sea level already, and any kind of increase in sea level will ultimately flood many of the coastal areas. Okay, already the sea erosion is a major issue, which I will show in the subsequent slides, and this is going to be the scenario. That means we need to be aware of this fact. And then coming back to the Indian scenario, India is the 13th most vulnerable country to climate change. The primary reason is very simple. The entire economy of India is based on the climate sensitive sectors. You take, for example, agriculture and fisheries and forestry, and all these are climate sensitive, and that is the reason why 60% of its agriculture is rain fed, and it hosts 33% of the world's poor people. So that means climate change will significantly impact their food and nutritional security, and that is the reason why India should be more worrisome about climate change, and we should be the world leader, in fact, in fighting for climate justice and against climate denial. And the series of maps I'll show you now, which will tell you the stories. I'm not explaining everything. For example, you look at the coastal area and the islands, and almost 1 meter rise in the sea level means it will affect almost 7.1 million people in India. You look at any of the states and the low-lying areas, this is one scenario as far as coastal area is concerned. Island regions are concerned, and desert will also have its own implication. For example, if you look at Rajasthan, it is the second state after Jammu and Kashmir where the greatest number of cold waves have occurred. That means Rajasthan, once it was a hotter area, now receiving hot, cold waves. And number of cold waves have increased in the Rajasthan area. That means even the desert region is not heating up, but the extreme colder situations are coming up in the desert areas. And look at the central India and peninsular India, and there also you can see that western part of the Karnataka may face few droughts due to the projected increase in the fewer droughts due to the increase in the rainfall. So there is some advantages as far as Karnataka is concerned, because there are some rain shadow areas where you can see that they may get rain. They may get rain as a result of the climate change. But if you look at the Himalayan region, it's a very complex scenario, because we have the largest ice-covered mountains in the world, the Everest, and where you have the Ganga river Ganges originating from the mountain ranges there, and then the mountain ranges, the height is declining because of the overheating in that area. And at the same time, on the other side, on the Kanchenjunga side, the height of the forest, the mountains are increasing because of colder situations. And at the same time, the glaciers from where the Ganga originates, the Gangotri, and there is a lot of, in the last 25-30 years, there is almost 1 kilometer decline in the height of the mountains, the ice-covered mountains, and that means the rain-fed rivers are going to be impacted as a result of the climate change. So this is also another striking reality as far as India is concerned. And Gangetic Plains. Gangetic Plains, the wheat yield is to decline by up to 32% in Punjab by 2050. This is one prediction because of the vagaries in the rainfall pattern and drought. And this is so that means that the region will be impacted as a result of drought. So this is again another scenario. So if you look at the atmospheric carbon dioxide concentration, and if you look at the concentration, this is the largest in the 2 million years history of the Earth. Okay, and that is the same with the methane and nitrous oxide. And that means there is, if you compare with 1750, there is an increase of 47% in the case of carbon dioxide. In the case of methane, there is 156% increase. And in the case of nitrogen dioxide, it is actually 23% increase. So that means all these greenhouse gases, they are increasing in concentration. Okay, and the changes are, if you look at the historical data, and the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is now almost 1,430 gigatons. That means 59% of the emissions is now represented by the carbon dioxide. So this is again one of the reasons why we should be worrisome about that. And surface temperature is increasing as a result of the carbon dioxide emission, and it will have a serious implication on weather and extreme climatic events. Okay, and I already told you about the cold extremes and in some area, and hot extremes in some area. Marine heat waves, it was not heard in Indian Ocean, but that started increasing, and that is the reason why, even in the recent past, the Kerala, there is a frequent warning about the low pressure areas, and then the rough sea, etc., etc. So there is intensity of heavy rainfall, and then agricultural and ecological droughts in some regions because of larger evaporation. Because temperature is high, then more water will enter into evaporate from the land surface, and that will also contribute to the excess rain. So this is a phenomena which is now happening in Kerala as well. Okay, and then global land monsoon precipitation, and that is now increasing in many parts of the world, except in some area because of the impact of aerosol. I already told you. Extreme climatic events we have witnessed in Kerala: 2018 flood, 2019 flood, because the pattern of rain is changing, and few days you will get maximum rain. Okay, so this is called the extreme rain pattern. And because the temperature is changing, the ocean is warming up, and that will create more and more low pressure areas, and that also create oxygen minimum zones in many parts of the ocean, and that affect the fishery production and things like that. So all these things are changing. And cyclones are totally unheard. For example, if those who are in the east coast of India, like the Odisha, West Bengal, and for some part of Tamil Nadu, the cyclones were there. But now the frequency is increasing in the east coast. One, in the west coast, for example, the Kerala, Karnataka coast, we never heard about any cyclones. Very, very rare. At the same time, in the recent past, Arabian Sea is heating up because of the global warming and the El Nino phenomena. It is heating up, and as a result, the number of cyclones in the Arabian Sea is increasing, and that will actually indirectly impact the fisherman's livelihood and their nutritional security and their income, livelihood, everything. Okay, and there are some data limitations, so that we cannot actually fully predict about the cyclone availability in the next 100 years. There is no full prediction in this report because of data limitations. And I already told you about the extreme, and also this will impact the water cycle, because the water, the entire planetary water is available through a cyclic process called the water cycle. And if there is changes in evaporation rate, and ultimately that will impact the water cycle as well. And then some of the changes, if the scenario continues, if we continue to emit greenhouse gases in larger proportions, and some of the changes will be irreversible. That means we cannot actually bring back the original scenario in many of the ecological situations. And that means especially if in the case of ocean, more than 70% of the planet is covered with ocean. And if there is more acidification, and there will be more stratification of the temperature, and then there will be more and more deoxygenation happening in many parts of the ocean, and then it will simply affect the biological productivity as well as the fishery resources. And these changes cannot be actually brought back immediately, because the ocean is a larger ecosystem, and carbon dioxide continues to be there in the atmosphere, and then the things may become irreversible. That is another warning. So that means we have to have a positive action to see that there will be net zero anthropogenic carbon dioxide emissions in future. And then what are the things to do? And every country is given a target, including India, based on the Paris Agreement. And you can see that there is nationally determined contribution. So the contributions of every country in terms of carbon dioxide emission is already fixed, and the country, including India, has already submitted the report. So we have to work on based on that. But our progress is not well, but we are doing many things. Okay. And then there is a general feeling that because of the restrictions of COVID and restrictions in the activity of human activity and automobile, there is a decline in the carbon dioxide emission. But it is not true. The total carbon dioxide emission globally has not significantly changed, because that means even after the COVID related restrictions, the total carbon dioxide emission has actually not severely declined. That means we must decide now. We must act decisively now to keep the temperature 1.5 degrees centigrade. So what are the things which we can do? That is what we now discuss. So what we can do? One, we have to think about green economy. We have to make our economy more and more green, and then clean air and better health for all. So this should be our aim for future. And that means we should have every country should take up the responsibility of the mitigation action, through which they can cut down the greenhouse gas emissions. You have to, from the fossil fuel economy, you have to go to the move towards or shift towards the alternative energy sources like solar energy, wind energy, tidal energy, etc. The government is working towards that. For example, some other countries like China has already into that, because they're almost 25% of the energy production now come from the non-formal sector. So that is a positive sign. The why India should be worrisome about climate change? Because India is most vulnerable, because this is a country where more than 1/4 of the population depends upon agriculture, and we are in the tropical belt. So we should, and largest number of the unemployed people in the world, largest number of agricultural laborers in the world, largest number of poor people in the world. So that means all these things, the climate change ultimately will impact the service, the economically vulnerable populations in the country. And that is the reason why we should be more and more worrisome. And for example, if you look at a small state like Kerala, we should also be worrisome, because we are living in a land of water, and where we have no change, because the monsoon starts from the ocean, and it is stopped by the Western Ghats, and we get the rain. Okay. And that means every system is interconnected. All this, so the maintaining the healthy ecosystem is very, very important in fighting climate change. If you have more carbon dioxide, more and more afforestation is the only solution through which you can actually sequester or remove the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So making or keeping the ecosystem healthy is one of the major steps in combating climate change. That is first thing that we have to understand. And then the way in which we think about development. For example, 2018 and 2019 flood happened in these kind of areas. For example, this is a way in which the river flows. It will take its own path, and these are the floodplains of rivers. And you are not supposed to make human settlements in this area, because this is a place for river. And that is the reason why after the 2018 flood, the government has also put forward a slogan, room for rivers. The rivers, they have their own path, and then you have to leave them, leave that area vacant. And because we don't have such a kind of developmental planning, ultimately it will cause the human death and a large number of mortalities. You look at this kind of a scenario. You go to some of the Western Ghat area, Eastern Ghat areas in Tamil Nadu or Karnataka, Eastern Ghat areas in Tamil Nadu or some part of Western Ghats in Karnataka, you see the same thing. You construct the houses in the landslide prone area, and ultimately curse that this is all caused by the environmental changes or climatic changes. And that means we have to prioritize the land use. And then there are some areas which are actually prone to natural hazards, and then we should keep the human settlements away from that area. And that is the one kind of a developmental strategy. And when we think about rejuvenating a river, for example, you look at the river in Japan. The river goes through the town, and what they did is that they cleaned the river, and what ultimately, for making it more and more eco-friendly and natural way, the natural vegetation they has to be there. And what we do in terms of river restoration is cleaning the entire vegetation of the river and making and trying to develop. So that means the entire way in which we look at the river should actually change, and that means more and more natural solutions should come in eco restoration process and climate adaptation process. And that is what we are not doing, and we should focus. And also, wherever the natural wetlands are there, you have to leave it like that, because they are the kidneys of nature. And that is another way in which we can prevent the climate change and actually avoid the flood. And all the flood happened in the cities of India primarily because the cities lost all the wetlands, which were actually the storehouses of excess water, flood water, including flood water. And they are called kidneys primarily because they detoxify the water which they receive. And that is another way in which we can do. And during the flood in Kerala, the people also realized that it is actually the people whom we can depend a lot, because they are the one making the empathy is something which is going to save the mankind. Helping each other is again another way in which, rather than fighting each other, helping each other, and we have to find the God in the human being itself. And that is a way in which we can proceed further. And that is another way in which we can progress. And we also have to find out a new role for science, because if the science remain as a separate entity, and it remain apart from the society, it is not going to do any kind of a service. So that we should have a triad working in properly in a coordinated manner, in an efficient manner. There should be science, there should be the science should serve the society, and then the societal changes will ultimately force the policy making and the political system to work for the betterment of the human beings. And that is the reason why this is very, very important. So we need to find out the synergy between all these things. And the scientific community and the research community also should understand what exactly is the issue with the people, what is their demand, what is their issue for the suffering. And these things actually should happen. And that should happen with the religious institutions also, because they should understand what are the needs of the society in the changing environmental scenarios, in the changing economic scenarios, changing social scenarios. You cannot have a program which is built in 100 years back, which can be operated now, because the society's demands are changing, people's perspectives are changing. So all these kind of sustainability should ultimately see the common man in the country and the society at large. You look at the coastal areas all over South India, and we are losing beaches. We are losing beaches in tremendous quantities because of our own activities, illegal construction, unscientific constructions. All these things happen, and then we are losing beaches. For example, you look at the way in which the Tamil Nadu fishermen, particularly in Karnataka, why they are fighting against the upcoming harbors, primarily because all these kind of constructions they take away their home, the beaches from where they operate, and that is the reason why they fight. They realize the fact that the beaches are most important as a means of climate adaptation, as a means of facing the future challenges. So so that means we should actually work for this. Okay. And then then pollution. The pollution and climate change are directly related, and if in any kind of change the climatic scenario, if you have more pollution, that means you are more damaging the human health. That the climatic change and extreme temperature itself is damaging the human health, and when more pollution means more and more suffering for the human beings. And if you look at many of the South Indian states, particularly Kerala, the total fishery wealth is also declining over the last 10-15 years, total catch. And then this is the scenario, and that there are a large number of reasons. We are fishing beyond the capacity and things like that. And we are losing beaches. We are losing beaches in large, for example, look at Pondicherry, look at Tamil Nadu, look at Kerala. We are losing beaches in large quantities. That means the fishermen's livelihoods are impacted, wildlife like turtles are impacted, and then the life and livelihood of the people are also increasing. And these are the issues connected with uh, the climate change in the coastal area. There will be more surface temperature for the sea. There will be increase in the storms and cyclones. Water chemistry is changing. I already told you about ocean acidification. Nutrient availability is also changing. All these things will have its own implications on the coastal people, fishery wealth, etc. And there are large number of issues. For example, if you look at the South Indian coastal fisher communities, where the CSI church play a very, very important role. And there also you can see that they are losing the fishing days. They are losing the fishing days primarily because of climatic changes. There will be warning of extreme events in the sea, and that will directly impact their life and livelihood as a result. And that will damage their gear, and that will damage their health also, because they are, again, more and more rough sea means more and more energy they have to spend, and that will ultimately have its own may have its own socio-economic impacts. For example, reduced health, increasing fuel costs, and then things like that. So lesser amount of resources available for nutritional security, etc., etc. So these are the things which we have to understand. For example, the entire the coastal the productivity is changing, and the fish which actually supported major part of the Kerala marine fisheries is sardine, which we call in Malayalam as mati. And the last 2 years, the population of oil sardine has come down to almost 45%. What is happening to the sardine? Because of more temperature, the sardine population is migrating northwards to the cooler population, to the cooler waters. Okay, so we are losing our sardine. And another issue is that, you know, the more and more oxygen minimum zones are appearing in the ocean, and as a result, fishes are avoiding this area, and that means we are going to have a drought. In Malayalam, we call it oil sardine as Kudumbam Pularti, which means, you know, the family provider, because when the people are poor, this fish provided the nutrients for them at a cheaper cost. Now the entire population is vanishing from the coast, primarily because of climatic changes. The mackerel, which is Ayla, which is very common in the Kerala coast, they are also moving down because to avoid the extreme temperature in the surface. And some of the fishes like the Nemipterus, which we call as Navara, where also their life cycle is changing, their breeding patterns are changing, all these things are happening. And more, you know, the ice melting means thermal expand, sea level rise, and many of the coastal areas are inundated. By the end of the century, there will be more and more inundation in the coastal areas where the fisher communities live, and then that will have its own social implications. Agricultural productivity will be affected, etc., etc. And we are also losing some of the natural barriers like mangrove forest in our ecosystem, and the natural barrier for which actually like sand dunes. Probably nobody will understand what is the role of a sand dune in the coastal area. They are the natural barriers which prevent the you know, the waves from coming into the land, and that is also lost. Coastal vegetation is lost because of the coastal developmental activities. All these things ultimately inundate the coastal area. So we have to have some kind of natural solutions. So we have to have some policies based on the realities, and there should be more and more people aware of that. I am happy that this ecological foundation is taking up this kind of an awareness program on climate change, because people should be aware of what is happening to the planet, what is happening in and around us. We should be more and more aware of that. Okay, so we cannot deny this fact that climate change is happening. And the school children like Greta Thunberg in Sweden, she has initiated a strike demanding the political leaders to take some action, because future is for them, and then it is our responsibility to give the earth back to them. So she is actually calling for in strike Fridays in the schools, and now it is now spreading to more than 100 countries in the world. Fridays for Future is the name. And that means the younger generation is now more aware of what is happening to climate. And then India, the scenario is more alarming, primarily because we have one of the largest populations in the world. By 2030, we will be the most populous country in the world. Per second, there will be one newborn in India. Per second, one newborn. That means more and more mouth to feed. Agricultural area is not increasing. So we should be more and more cautious every day. to sustain the population, make them nutritionally happy. And then 2030, we have a series of sustainable development goals, which is set by the United Nations. And look at the sustainable development goal 1 and 2. It is to avoid poverty and zero hunger. That means the priority of the world for development is basically for removing poverty. Removing poverty means you have to actually ensure the food production, and that means you have to have a balanced climate. I'm not explaining everything on this, but these are the priorities of the world. And then look at the India's performance in sustainable development goals. Indian rank is 117 in the world. That means we are one of the poorly performing countries as far as sustainable development is concerned. And the reasons are very simple. If you look at some of the issues here, and the education play a very, very important role. Wherever there is more and more population in India, and there the female literacy will be less. That means we have to make the people educated and see that the population is also controlled. And this is another way in which we can fight for a better place to live. And so India is not the world leader, because we can do a lot of things, especially we have to move from the fossil fuel based economy to the alternate the energy sources, and that should be our priority. And we have to become successful. We have to actually change our economy, and then we have to have a sustainability thinking as far as the development is concerned. We should have new programs on tourism. We have no concepts as far as the reducing our carbon footprint is concerned. For example, if you look at many of the foreign, including France, if you go, the public, the transport system play a very, very important role in contributing to carbon emission. And there, in majority of the path, you can have a pedestrian system, you can have bicycles, which will reduce the carbon footprint, and that is expanding to universities and colleges across the world. So that kind of a carbon neutral concept actually should come in, and that play a very, very important role. Then how will you fight for climate change? Before I close, one is prevention and mitigation. That's the role of the government. And individually, you can also contribute how you can actually reduce the carbon dioxide emission personally, and government has to take an action to curtail the kind of emission in a phased manner. And we should remain prepared to face the disaster, because disasters are increasing, and we should have the positive response. The government is taking up a lot of actions, including we have a separate climate cell in the Ministry of Environment. And then we have to make the people adapt to the changing scenario, and that means we have to rehabilitate the people, and then we have to work for that. So that means there should be a disaster risk management cycle in operation. Already this is happening slowly in the system, and education play a very, very important role. The awareness program like this play a very, very important role to keep the people aware, and keep the people aware of the link between development and climate change, and things like that. And then we have to understand more. For example, this is a classical book, an author whom I love the most, Lester Brown. He has some book like The Green Economy, then World in the Edge. All clearly says that our future is not safe unless and until we intervene at some kind of a sometime now. And then also we have to remember that if you really wanted to develop and sustain, you have to actually look at the nature, and that is the only way out, because the nature provides you with a lot of free services, and the nature is much complex than you think. So, okay, that is another way in which you have to progress. And I am quite impressed by this video, and which probably you can see later. I'm not showing it fully. And this is a TED talk by a Bhutanese minister, and he is explaining Prime Minister Tobgray, and Tobgray says how his country became carbon neutral. If you look at GDP, it is one of the slowest one of the lowest in the world. At the same time, you look at how the people live happily, okay, with limited resources, and making in a country where the people live very happily. Happiness index is one of the maximum in the world. Look at Finland, where the happiness index is more. So living happily doesn't mean that you have to spend more, you have to emit more. But reducing carbon is one way in which you can live happily, in addition to all social changes. So that means sustainability should be our principle. Understand what exactly is happening to the world, and how we can better restore. For example, one of the answer to that is actually restoration of the ecosystem, so that they will function as a resilient system in the world. And whenever you are in a church, you can tell the people that the living sustainably is one of the way in which you can save the world. And reducing the consumerism is one way in which you can reduce the carbon emission and contribute to climate change. And carbon neutrality in the lives and livelihood of the people is another way in which you can progress towards a better world. And living happily, happiness doesn't mean money and wealth. Living happily is one way in which we can actually contribute, reducing your desires. And these are the ways in which sustainable living should actually play a very, very important role in contributing ultimately to that, so that we'll have a better future. Especially when you look at the future in the post-COVID scenario, there is a lesser amount of resources available. At the same time, people remaining happy is one of the major things which people should understand, and reducing the demand for the resources and the pressure on the resources. And that is a way in which we can also contribute to the better carbon and better carbon future as well. Thank you.